There are two kinds of plants in PVZ2, when you boil it down to the core fundamentals. You have the plants who have incredibly complex and intricate mechanics. Plants you could learn from every run have slight elements and intricacies you would never have seen otherwise. You learn how to better use a plant after each individual run through of playing with it, slowly learning how to make use of the thousands of different branches of the plant to make full use of the plant until you've fully optimized every asset. Or you have the good plants, where you place it once in a field and you fully understand its job. You know, like sunflowers, or a pea shooter. One of the things about PVZ2 that makes it a casual game is that plants are inherently simple. The nuance and complications that come from them are those that naturally arise during gameplay, not because the plants are inherently complicated at their core. In other words, simple to learn, hard to master. The classic catchphrase they toss into basically anything these days. Except, you know, like, actually true. Citron, to me, is one of the best examples of this philosophy. It's one of the most straightforward plants in the entirety of the franchise, extremely one-note, but has really incredible base design that I think really helps it stand out. And that I think is special. With that being said, we should probably explain what Citron actually is, now shouldn't we? Citron is, well, it should be obvious. It's a citron, you know, as in a plant. Or is it? See, you may have noticed already that Citron Real Life has a very different look and vibe to Citron PVZ2. You know, like not being orange, or being notably lumpy. The Citron PVZ2 is in fact entirely curvy and not rough and rugged. It is not even the case that Citron Real Life has variants that are often seen as orange. Only variants like the Volcano Lemon and the Rangpur, sorry for me saying that entirely wrong, have the orange coloration, with only the latter being close enough to Citron PVZ2 to constitute a real connection. And even then, this is a plant hybrid between an orange and a Citron Real Life. In addition, if this all wasn't enough for you, Citron PVZ2 reappears in Garden Warfare 2 and Battle for Neighborville. In the former, Citron PVZ gun game is outright called an orange in its description, while in the latter he looks like a nerd. His weapon in that is called the Juice Cannon, which means it is most likely not a citron, a plant most well known for its extremely low amount of juice. It'd be like if P shooter PVZ shot at basketball or something. They just don't do that. Now you may be questioning canonicity here, and that is a great question. We do not know if the shooter games are, in fact, canon to PVZ2. However, Citron PVZ gun game reappears in PVZ Heroes, the weird car spin-off game PVZ fans will convince you is amazing thanks to like 2 YouTubers. Anyways, this game is even stranger canonicity, and I just want to bring it up to be confusing. Because Citron PVZ gun game and card game also says he is from the future, heavily implying regardless of a change in canonicity, it is broadly the same character. If you consider this an alternate universe, as seems most likely, it is still more likely that Citron PVZ2 is in fact Citron PVZ gun game and card game. But none of that actually matters because the best evidence in the entire franchise is actually seen in PVZ2. You see, Citron has a bunch of costumes. 2 of these costumes seem to prove that it's actually an orange, that being the blender and the juice carton. I could not find actual citron juice, only orange juice. Therefore, it must be orange for these 2 costumes to make any sense. All this to say that they just thought Citron was a cooler name than orange for a future-based plant. Cowards. Citron as a plant is actually pretty simple. It's unlocked in far future and has a bit of a heavy attacker roll at a pretty high sun cost of PVZ2. What makes the plant special and unique though are the attacking mechanics. Citron will charge up for an absolutely massive attack, dealing a whopping 800 damage on launch. It can kill a bucket in 2 hits, a gargantua in 5, and most other lighter targets in 1 to 2 hits. It deals insanely good damage, but lacks any area effect or similar. To be more precise here, Citron takes approximately 9.73 seconds to shoot. For some reason this thing's formula fire is dumb, being 7 divided by the firing rate value, then adding 2.73 seconds on top of it. I hate it. If you're a leveling player, do keep this in mind when leveling, as it causes weirdness. For instance, a level 2 Citron takes 8.56 seconds to fire, or an improvement of about 1.2 seconds. It's a useful formula to know, albeit a sign of how the code was forced to do the impossible post-leveling, it seems. Ah well. It is also notable that Citron will always charge attacks, even when nothing is in the lane. All plants do this, by the way, though it is basically impossible to see under normal circumstances. I also would like to give an honorary award to Citron's Almanac for being the absolute most useless thing ever. It literally states a stat which does not exist in-game, plant food power, and it gets Citron's plant food effect comedically wrong. In addition to this utterly useless number that only means something if you know Citron's formula. It is impressively stupid. With that said, Citron's plant food doesn't, in fact, redirect zombies to adjacent columns. It flings them off-screen entirely. This is an instant kill on all zombies except the far future robots and gargantuas, which will instead take 2,500 damage and stop the projectile in its tracks. This is enough to instantly kill all of them except gargantuas, but will leave them insanely crippled and ready for death. It is, notably, usually worse than Laserbeam's plant food effect, as that does 1.8k damage to these targets and goes right through them instead. Anyways, that would be Citron over-explained. The only things actually important to know is that it has a slow attack speed and it hits like an absolute truck, because those are the only traits you really should care about when using Citron in-game. And from that alone, you should figure out exactly where strengths and weaknesses should lie. Damage thresholds are a simple premise where at a certain point of damage, your effective damage output increases significantly due to killing something in less hits. For instance, going from 100 damage to 101 damage in PVZ2 means essentially nothing, as no target is killed faster in 101 damage than 100 damage. It's also the reason 100 is such an incredible high damage threshold to hit, barely wasting damage on any zombie and cleanly 2-hit KOing basic zombies. When it comes to plants, the biggest concern is overkill damage, as it means some plants can be in a very awkward spot. For instance, dealing 180 damage can really screw a plant over, as they're unable to get clean kills on, really, anything in the game. This results in a high amount of overkill damage, effectively lowering overall DPS, unless you go out of your way to screw around to fix this. Evidently, Citron, as a plant that deals 800 damage, doesn't exactly play by these rules. Mathematically, its damage per second is about double that of what it should be for a plant of that cost, but it's usually not going to be hitting that. Even against Coneheads, it loses quite a lot of its damage, only hitting max damage against Bucketheads, Gargantuas, and far future mechs. But even then, it's only for some of the shots, and against basics, its damage drops really low overall. But I mean, even against Coneheads, it's dealing above cost DPS. And against basics, it's about 0.5 times the amount of overall DPS a plant of its cost should be doing. Which means that even in the worst case, it's still arguably fine. But when it's strong, it's insanely effective against its targets. But even in this optimal case, its weaknesses are still notable and worth keeping in mind. After all, Citron fundamentally sucks against hordes and fast targets that can slip by it easily due to the fire rate. Ambush zombies, especially in higher numbers, can very easily make progress against you while leaving basically no time to counter. Even Imthrow becomes significantly more dangerous due to Citron's strange method of firing. But there are other options to deal with these issues. For instance, using instas in different scenarios, or prioritizing instas that have larger range but weaker damage, like Crocodile or Ghost Pepper. These are all things that must be kept in consideration when using Citron, but also things you probably understood from the first 5 seconds of seeing Citron in action, which to me is the reason why the plant's design is as strong as it is. When it comes to designing plants in PVZ2, it is important to remember that plants do not exist in a vacuum. Rather, they exist as parts of a larger picture. Because of this, I don't think making plants more complex actually makes them more complex, as initially strange as that may seem. Rather, I think that complexity comes from the more subtle interactions between plants. And to explain that, I want to compare a modern PVZ2 plant to Citron to show how complexity affects it. Let's choose Ice Room. Screw it. Ice Room in PVZ2 is a melee plant. It can chill zombies in the 3x3 area around it and deals heavy damage itself. In the chill radius, Winterman plants will deal increased damage, about 1.75 times what they would normally deal. It also breaks zombie death animations for some reason. Thank you, PopCap! It's not exactly hard to understand, but it is certainly more complex than Citron. But when it comes to actually using it, is it really? Its chill aura and its melee attack both mean it does the exact same thing. It's a melee plant that wants to be in the front, and in reality is basically as complicated as Call Snapdragon when used in this way. And the boost is, well, not exactly useful. It only affects chilling plants. Plants not exactly documented to deal good damage. In fact, its damage boost isn't even worth using in most cases. The only Wintermelon plant worth boosting the damage of is Wintermelon, which doesn't typically need it due to it not doing too much damage in the first place. And Ice Room itself doing much better DPS than it ever could. And because of how the balancing works, it lacks a real weakness due to being insanely busted in terms of damage. In other words, mechanically using Ice Room doesn't really do anything to add to your strategy. Meanwhile, well, I already talked about Citron, didn't I? Citron is extremely simple, yet has so many more options to build it around. Do you want to bring AoE to support it? Laser Beam, Snapdragons, Spikeweeds, all of these can cause major adjustments to the overall strategy. Or do you instead focus much more on instas, to clear up zombie horde density, like crocodiles, ghost peppers, guavas, and so forth? Or do you pivot into a more defensive strategy, using the likes of Char Guard, or use all three at the same time for less focus on each individually? Evidently, in its simplicity, strategic complexity has been brought forth. And to me, this is the best thing a plant can possibly do in PVZ2, because it opens up the game for more interesting and complex gameplay, while keeping the game ultimately simple at its core to understand and play. The strategy comes from what seems natural and obvious, not as superfluous and hard to remember. It's much easier to remember Citron fires slower than Ice Dream's entire suite of abilities, while the formers remain more interesting and complex than the latters. In this way, complexity becomes simplicity, and simplicity becomes complexity. The player has room to experiment with the simple nature of Citron to build it out in new ways, while the complexity of Ice Dream forces it into a set path of play. And being too strong results in it having no challenge. That's not to say strong plants are inherently bad, but they can be made in ways to be mechanically interesting that they often aren't. And Citron isn't interesting because it's on the weaker side of plants. It's interesting because it has weaknesses that matter and need to be accounted for, with strengths that are distinctly interesting and worth considering. Of course, a plant being overpowered makes it tactically uninteresting. Hello Parker, how are you? But plants are allowed to be strong and maintain tactical interests. Plants like Wintermelon do this quite well, being insanely strong, but requiring a player to understand how to abuse stuns and instant damage to maximize the potential. Even in mods, Citron typically works quite nicely. Most mods keep its vanilla design philosophy intact by keeping its single target damage and lack of splash, which on paper should mean it gets outclassed more due to the typically larger horde size, but typically it only makes its strengths and weaknesses more important. Hitting above your sun cost is exceptionally rare in most PVZ2 mods, so its utility in being insanely strong is only more useful, especially when threats like Gargantuas get only more common. In most mods, it tends to be shockingly strong as a result, but definitely requires more thought behind maximizing its value in harder stages. And truthfully, it's in mods where Citron can truly shine. Because I'm going to be real here, PVZ2's core balancing really bothers me. I want to briefly touch on what I think is the biggest issue that lies at the core of PVZ2, and it's the same one I feel like I've mentioned time and time again, but will continue to be relevant, as PVZ2's balancing has consistently ruined the game itself over and over again, and frankly, I think it's important to talk about this, considering that the balancing is the only reason Citron fades into the background as much as it does. Because Christ, Citron is outclassed in vanilla by anything and everything. I'm not even talking about CDMs or premiums here, because Coconut Cannon exists. Coconut Cannon costs slightly more than Citron, and technically has a lower fire rate, but none of that matters because its shots do slightly more damage, and its attacks have heavy 3x3 splash. The ability to kill basics in adjacent lanes is insanely strong, and due to being a manual plant, Coconut Cannon has much better stalling capabilities throughout the game, and can guarantee massive value in its attacks. Where Citron often gets blocked by Light Shaft, Coconut Cannon dominates. And here's the thing, as good value as Citron is, it's by far the worst plant in its cost range. Freepier doesn't give nearly as much value, but has consistency with its damage and multi-lane power, something very valuable. Melonpult has good splash and deals more than good enough damage in most cases, also scaling incredibly well. And Banana Launcher? Well, It's one of the best plants in the game, frankly. And all this is ignoring the Wintermelon standing ominously in the corner. Wintermelon is the king of late game damage, and as such, kinda renders all of her options obsolete. Except Banana Launcher because, well, Banana Launcher. Wintermelon deals good damage alongside the chill effect, which is insanely strong and completely dominates stages, and synergizes with stuns and instants in a way most other plants do not. Citron itself doesn't really synergize with instants in as strong of a way as Wintermelon does, requiring them to be used on weaker targets instead of optimizing the damage they can do. And as a result, Citron is kinda a bit pointless in the overall kit. I wouldn't say it's the only plant like this, however. Plants like Spikeweed can be difficult to find full value in. Plants like Fat Beet have such terrible world placement and stats, but I just can't do anything of worth. While plants like Bloomerang and Nightshade, who have potential to be legitimately interesting and worthwhile options, stray to the wayside in favor of the insane power from likes of Celery, Magnifying Grass, or Cherry Bomb. It's a legitimate shame, but that's just kinda how vanilla is designed. It's not meant to be super balanced, and truthfully, a lot of these plants remain usable for a while. But a lot of plants can just get overlooked due to this. I'm gonna be entirely honest. When I was younger, I spent most of my time cycling through the same few plants. Wintermelon and Red Stinger to be precise. Plants like Citron require just that extra bit of effort that never felt worth it. Which sucks, as it's a plant I grew to realize was actually legitimately really fun, but the game's balance never let me experience it properly. Regardless, it being insane is what made me want to make a video on it. PVZ2 is a game with tons and tons of options that, as a player, feel more and more locked down on specific choices as you progress. I thoroughly believe that showing these more off-meta plants can help showcase PVZ2's design as more deep and interesting than simply Magnifying Grass and Wintermelon, the video game. It helps show some more sides of the game's design that I do legitimately want to praise. As to be real here, these plants will never likely be meta, even in a more balanced experience. Hopefully all this convinced you to pick your funny orange for a test run at some point in time. It's a genuinely cool and fun plant to use, which I think makes it among the best of the best in terms of raw fun. It's very easy to overlook, which is unfortunate, but that's why I got a video like this. Because guilt-tripping people into using a weak plant is like my whole MO as a YouTuber, ain't it? Jokes aside, this has been a nice step back from my mega large project to sit back and relax a bit with a more chill time. Mostly because I'm badly brought back in the Lobotomy Corporation, and I kinda want to take a small break before I leap back into that nonsense of a script. So yeah, unplanned Citron video kinda just happened after the Eclise video, so yeah. With all that said, this has been Creeps, and have a good one.